Well, for some analysis now, I'm joined by Howard Eissenstat. He's a history professor at St. Lawrence University in New York State, and he's writing a book about Turkish nationalism. Professor Eissenstat, thanks for being with us. As we just heard, Turkey has had a terrible year. Deadly attacks that were blamed on IS, deadly attacks blamed on the PKK, and of course the failed coup over the summer. Are these things connected?
Yeah, I think they are. I think that what we're seeing is a destabilization of Turkey, in part because of growing authoritarianism, fractures within society, and we're also seeing blowback from Syria, both from jihadists who have found sanctuary, and from weapons and materials and training that have been sort of shaped by the Syrian conflict and now are flowing back into Turkey.
I want to come back to the Syria question in a minute, but just picking up on the authoritarian aspect that you mentioned. In the aftermath of this failed coup, we saw President Erdogan crack down on his opponents, purge public sector staff. There was a crackdown on the media. And yet, despite this authoritarian response, the country right now seems to be facing more instability and not less. Why? Why can't he get a grip on Turkey?
Look, I think the coup was extraordinarily violent, and a crackdown on people who are associated with the coup was natural and necessary. But the authoritarianism is something quite different, and it's far more extensive. It tends to leave people who don't see themselves as affiliated with the AKP feeling more threatened, and it actually exacerbates fracture lines. The Turkey has been undergoing sort of a culture war for many years now, and the authoritarianism leaves less and less space for people who might be peacefully critical of the AKP to participate in the public sphere.
Turkey's involvement in the Syria conflict has pretty much swallowed the other stories that are going on in the country. What role are other domestic conflicts playing in fueling Turkey's fracture lines, as you term them?
Sure. So there's a number of ways. The Syrian civil war has created a space for a new type of jihadi community within Turkey itself. There have always been sort of Salafi jihadis in Turkey, but they've grown in numbers and in power because of the conflict in Syria. As well, lots of Kurdish militants. The PKK in Turkey is genetically connected to the YPG in Syria, the Kurds in Syria. That means people getting extra training, combat experience, and also greater access to weapons. All of that's come back to Turkey. I think that in part we can attribute the growth of ISIS in Turkey and the capacity of ISIS to stage effective attacks in Turkey to those connections to Syria. As well, the Syrian civil war has clearly exacerbated tensions between the state and its own Kurdish population.
We have a soundbite, actually, from the Deputy Prime Minister of Turkey. I want to take a listen to that now and then get your thoughts on that.
No matter what you plan, Turkey is capable of taking all kinds of measures inside and outside of its borders, and we are determined to continue our cross-border operations until terrorist organizations can no longer harm Turkey.
So Turkey's Deputy Prime Minister saying there that he is determined to continue cross-border operations until terrorist organizations can no longer harm Turkey. It sounds to me, Professor Eissenstat, like he's saying Turkey is going to continue its involvement in Syria. Is that your interpretation as well?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question, and certainly it's not shown any inclination to accept a Kurdish proto-state in northern Syria, and obviously, particularly after the events of the past couple of days, there's even more desire to confront ISIS. I think that clearly a military component to fighting terror is necessary. The problem is twofold, I think. The first is that in part because of the crackdown, the Turkish security services are not what they once were. There are a lot of well-trained, experienced people that are no longer participating. There's sort of this purge within the intelligence, police, and military that's underway that undermines the capacity of the state to work effectively, and also the reliance on sort of strong police measures, strong military measures. That's fine if it's coupled with space for legitimate participation. The attack on the Kurdish HDP, for example, the democratically elected Kurdish opposition party, the attack on opposition journalists, that closes space that needs to be open for a successful, healthy Turkey to survive.
Yeah, it does seem like the space for criticism in Turkey has become smaller and smaller. And I wonder, how much support does Erdogan have right now? He was nearly toppled this summer. The country's had a very violent year. Do people in Turkey still support him as a majority?
So Erdogan's always been sort of this polarizing 50-50 sort of figure. He's very popular with AKP loyalists, and that's not an insignificant part of the population. It's anywhere from 45 to 50% of the population, and he's probably expanded that personal support somewhat since the coup, where he sort of emerged for many people as a national hero. But that still leaves 50 to 45% of the population that doesn't support him, and they need a place within Turkish society as well.
All right, that's Professor Howard Eissenstat. He's a history professor at St. Lawrence University in New York State. Professor Eissenstat, thank you for being with us today on DW News.